Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and those beyond the binary. This is the third episode of the Socialist Podcast. I am Ruben.
And I'm Kyle.
And we are your hosts. Today, we are going to be doing sort of a second part of our last episode in which we went through some important terms that are really key to understanding any sort of discussion about socialism. Socialists, communists will use words, uncommon words, and if you don't know what they mean, it's really hard to follow. Today, we're going on that same vein of talking about what words mean, but we're delving into the words that are key to understanding Marx and Marxism. Marx, of course, very briefly, being the founder, economist, sociologist, writer, founder of the modern communist ideology, Marxism, Marxian thought, lived in the 19th century and was supported and financed and collaborated with Friedrich Engels, famously, wrote a lot of the great works that socialism, modern socialism, is based on at its sort of foundation, and did some really important analysis, economic analysis of capitalist economies in the 19th century, out of which grew this analytical framework that we call Marxism today. So with that, I think we'll jump right in, and Kyle can take it away.
Yeah, so first I wanted to talk to you guys about what is communism, and it's a little bit of a charged question because it's not immediately obvious. To those of you who've maybe done some perusing around the communist spaces, you might have found the term, or rather the definition of a classless, stateless, moneyless society. However, I think that this is actually quite reductive. I think that it's so much more than just that. Um, One of the things that makes communism so unique is that, yes, it is in fact a economic system. Like that is what Marx and Engels originally envisioned. They saw it as a system or an economic system that exists after socialism. So the thing about economic systems is that um, each economic system is a stepping stone for society, right? So first we started with a traditional economic system, and this was just like a trading system. Then we moved over to mercantilism. Then we had feudalism, and then we went to capitalism. And Marx says next we need socialism. But beyond socialism is our key term, communism. And yeah, while it can technically be defined as a stateless, classless, moneyless society, there is still quite a bit more to it. Now that's the economic answer, right? Like that is what communism is as an economist. But if we want to speak from the philosophical end, it's really more like a set of principles. Now, Frederick Engels made one of my favorite books of all time. It's called The Principles of Communism, which goes in much depth about what it means to be a communist and like what communism means at a philosophical level. And I wanted to go over some of the principles of communism with you.
Cool, go for
And
it.
I'm gonna have to look it up real quick because I don't remember offhand.
Yeah, I mean, well, let me just while you're doing that, because that's actually a really great way of using some of this time. But yeah, I mean, just to break down a piece of what you just said, Kyle, like the way Marx envisioned this, and the way many thinkers have, and leaders and writers, leaders, I should say, of socialist communist societies. is that socialism is this sort of transitionary time before communism, and communism is kind of the end goal of socialism. Socialism is the real world economic organization that a society transitioning from capitalism after a revolution sort of has to set up as it, nothing happens in the blink of an eye, as it kind of does away, hopefully in the first instance, with the most pernicious aspects of capitalism. But then, even just as a matter of practicality, I mean, the the people in the society are not going to be used to a totally new way of organizing it, new concepts of, what is value, what does it mean to what does it mean, and what's the motivation for a hard day's work, what do we owe to one another. These things, even just on the level of the psychology of the masses, are will take some time. And so Marx and, notably Lenin and Mao, actually very notably Mao, took account of this, and that sort of stage where you're transitioning, where you're phasing out the exploitative and more characterized by private ownership aspects of the economy and of the society. That part is called socialism, and then the later stage, when sort of we get to where we're going, where the exploitation has been, totally stamped out. We have no more need for money. We have no more need for arbitrary hierarchy that has any form of monopoly on violence, aka the state. And there's no more classes, meaning that the ruling class has been totally abolished, and everyone in the society is one class, just workers, just people. Or I
Yeah,
guess they're not one class. Once you have one class, you have no classes. There's no classes.
right. Yeah, you have a dictatorship of a certain class, right? Um, Actually, that's not true, right? Because a dictatorship.
Right. That's socialism. Right.
Yeah,
It's so I mean, not utopian. It's so far off that even thinking about it in these very specific terms, communists don't talk about communism much. We talk about socialism a lot.
yeah, we that's exactly correct. Like I would love to sit around and talk about communism all day, but unfortunately, that's just not really what people are receptive to. Meeting people
Yeah.
in the middle means that we end up talking about socialism a lot more than
Right.
communism, certainly. Um, but before we move away from the economic system, I just want to highlight that like it is entirely historically unfathomable that Karl Marx was able to, from a capitalist society, and this was like an early capitalist society that he lived in. It was the 1850s Germany. So, from this system, he was able to identify two economic systems ahead. That has just like always blown my mind. I think that's absolutely crazy. And
Hmm.
to kind of like put that into perspective of like what that would mean for anybody else in history, it would be almost like sitting in mercantilism and predicting capitalism,
Mm.
you know? So
Right.
totally
Right.
unfathomable. No one in history has really ever even done this. Totally unprecedented. Um,
Yeah.
but now I'd like to move into the philosophy of communism because that I do have my notes now.
Great.
And so real quickly, we're going to run through these pretty quick. But I believe the biggest thing that the principles of communism stands for is the abolition of private property. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this saying. There's a very famous saying. It says that the primordial sin was private property, right? Because as Marx identifies, they were communists on this planet once upon a time. These people were nomads. They took care of their sick without any profit motive, and none of them owned anything. This is what Marx called the utopian communists, and they are our ancestors effectively. Um, And my sister actually has this really fun theory that the plants have conspired against us because the plants demanded that we like plant them in the ground and stick around to make sure that they grow, thus forcing us to privatize property slowly. But that's another conversation. Do you have anything to say on private property,
Um,
Ruben?
well, just not. I think that that was great. Private property, right? So no private individual can make private money from a big business. Let's just say that to put it into to other terms. But I did just want to make really clear the points we were saying before as we get into this first bullet point
Hmm.
that you just did, private property. So like these lines between communism and socialism, communism being this moneyless classes, blah blah blah, society, they start to blur here. So there is if you're listening and it feels like are we talking about socialism or talking about communism? These lines are blurry because the people who take seriously socialism as a stage, as the next stage of economy of society, are called communists, and they do want communism. So when you hear like the China is ruled by is run by a communist party, they're not trying to assert that they are living in a moneyless classless blah 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 society. They are committed to communist ideals that compel them to bring socialism to a society. So we're talking about the abolition of private property, which is certainly something that would exist under communism in that sort of idealized way, but it also exists to one extent or another in the transition stage, the socialist stage. Private property has been abolished to one extent or another in every socialist society that's ever existed since Marx.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good note. Um, I don't really have anything to add to that. I think you said that excellently. But I would like to get moving forward with our next bulletin point, and that is something that you've already alluded to earlier, and that is classless society, right? So communists identify the world as the chief conflict that drives society is the workers versus the proletariat. And I know that we've already talked a lot about that here on this show. Communists envision a classless society. The next bulletin point will be collective ownership, right? So resources, industries, and land are all collectively owned and managed to serve the needs of the community rather than individual profit. And again, this is how our ancestors operated. They lived nomadically, traversing this land, um, for 5,000 years, doing exactly this. So we know that it's possible. We've seen it before. The next bulletin point is the
And well,
abolition of,
just to cut in real quick, that
yes.
the way that a collective can own something is through democracy. There's no other tool. I mean, you can structure those democratic functions in any number of ways, but the only way that a group of people can own one thing is through some sort of way of distilling the will of those people into decisions made about that thing so that the people control it as opposed to one person.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. And so after that, we also envision the abolition of exploitation, which sounds like a lot of words, but it's really not all that complicated. Ultimately, we foresee a world where workers are not exploited, where workers own their entire. If you work for something, then it's yours. You own it, And we seek to end the exploitation, end the capitalist class, and make sure that
And
everybody is
and
treated equally.
and I think I think later on in this episode we'll get to the concept of surplus value and what that means. But surplus value and exploitation are very tightly linked. The main form, or the as it pertains to classical Marxism as Marx wrote about it in many of his works, exploitation has a sort of a technical definition which has to do with the stealing, essentially, of profit from workers. That, in a sort of arbitrary way, one person who, because their name is on a lease, or they had the capital to buy a bunch of machines, that who knows where that came from, they are sanctioned legally, allowed legally to exploit the workers, namely by taking part of the wealth, part of the value that is created by those workers, and just expropriate it to themselves, put it in their own coffers, to do with it what they will.
Yep. And then the next one will be central planning. So this is a very complicated one. Economic activity is planned and directed from the state or the community rather than being left to market forces. So I know that there's going to be a natural inclination towards the state being this evil force against the people always. It can't possibly work for the people. But I think that a lot of people would be very surprised that it can, in fact, work for the people. And that is ultimately what socialism aims to bring to the table. Lenin found
And
that. Oh, go ahead.
go on. No, no, please go.
Lenin found that in order to, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds here. So
Well,
ultimately,
I'll just say
yeah,
then
go ahead.
that this is not some, like, the state doesn't necessarily have to, like, I can imagine a state that works for the people. Like, this has been this has happened many, many times in modern history. Since Marx, socialist. There have been many examples of socialist states that have dramatically, and in the context of capitalist, or in comparison to the way capitalist states have treated their people, have dramatically increased the quality of life, of their people, and been done that in a way that was sensitive to the way the people wanted to run their lives and the types of improvements that the people wanted. So, in other words, just another way of saying a state that works for the people and not against them.
Right. Yeah. I brought up in another episode, I believe it was episode one. One of my favorite things that Castro did was directly after the revolution. He said, wherever you currently live is now your permanent home, and the state can never take it from you. And that's the kind of like thing that we're talking about. That happens. Like Cubans to this day, right now in 2025, have free healthcare, free housing, and free education. That's socialism, and communists are all about that, and we want to do more of it. In fact, because ultimately, what good is a society if we're not actively making society better for the next generation?
Hmm.
So, and that actually segues perfectly into the next bullet point, which is from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. The infamous Karl Marx quote, the one that everybody knows. But it's true though, like ultimately communists are, we believe in equality. Like nobody's better than anybody else. I don't care what your bank account says. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you are, where your background comes from, like what you've been through. At the end of the day, we should all treat each other with respect and dignity that we wish to see for ourselves.
Yeah, and two things on that. One is the other aspect, the other very important aspect of that is that you are entitled to what you need. What you need can be defined broadly, as in what you need to flourish as a person, not just to get by. But you're not entitled to more. You're not entitled to a hoard of wealth. That's a very important part. And then another thing, this actually, to each according to their ability, from each according to their ability to each according to their need. This is actually a place where communism and socialism do, as it's come down through history, pretty clearly diverge. I don't know if it was Lenin who formulated that under socialism, a society, think about right after the revolution in China or Russia, those the two big ones, two big socialist revolutions that have happened. There's no way that the day after the revolution, the new revolutionary government can give everybody what they need according to their need. I mean, that's total pie in the sky. It doesn't work that way. So I don't know if it was Lenin or if Marx formulated this, but the formulation of that same aphorism under socialism is from each according to their ability, to each according to their work. So you can see right there, they're borrowing from, well, a capitalist, but from prior existing economic systems that reward work sort of in proportion to how much you produce, and that's seen as a transitionary, not perfectly just, but a practicality under socialism.
Yep, yep, absolutely correct. And yeah, I don't really have anything else to add, so we'll go to the next one. And I have universal education. I think that this kind of like speaks for itself, so I don't want to spend too much time here. But I do want to say that every single nation that practices socialism has 100% literacy rate, and historically speaking, there have been two instances of a massive increase in literacy rate after a socialist revolution, unprecedented in history, unlike anything the world's ever seen. And that is the USSR and China. In about 60 years, both of them, they went from feudal peasants with about a 23% literacy rate to 100%. That's less than one person's lifetime. So education is absolutely massive. Literacy campaigns absolutely massive. Like whatever it takes. The idea is that we have to get people thinking, we have to get people learning, and in order to maintain the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next we have internationalism, which is a bit more of a complicated one. But ultimately, like what it really means is that the workers have to stand together. Like we're all in this together. We're all workers. We're all being exploited. Well, most of us are, anyways. Um, you know, so like there is no skin color. There is no cultural differences. At the end of the day, when it comes to the proletariat, we stand as one, and ultimately, none of us are free until we all are.
Yeah, and international borders were drawn by kings and queens and rulers of empire, whether capitalists and nominally democratically elected members of the ruling class, in order to benefit themselves, in order to benefit the international ruling class, and they have no, besides some edge cases, they really have borders. That is, really have no utility for the working class as it pertains to the liberation of the working class. So it's not only sort of a foreign concept. It's not only sort of it's a harmful concept. National borders divide when there's no or next to no benefit to the world, to the working classes of the world, to be divided in that way.
Yep, fantastic. And then just the final thing is revolutionary change. So this actually, in my opinion, might be the biggest one, or at least the one that people tend to struggle with the most. Because really, what revolutionary change is alluding to, what it isn't necessarily saying, but it does mean, is revolutionary optimism. You know, it's really hard during, especially times like this, where it seems like things are so bleak and everything's, it's so easy to give into doomerism at times like this. But this is when revolutionary change or revolutionary optimism really comes into play. We have to be maintaining positivity. We know that nothing is permanent. We know that change will come, and we know that you can only fly against the winds of history for so long. So, but instilling that in people and like trying to talk them down from all of the antagonisms of the mainstream media and stuff like that is a constant challenge. And this is really where I think that principality really comes in, and it might be one of the most important ones, if not the most important one. What do you think, Ruben?
Yeah. Yeah, what's that Ursula K. Le Guin quote? I'm sure I'll not get it quite right, but it's something like capitalism seems eternal and so powerful and eternal, but so did the divine right of kings. I
Yes.
think a a big a big difference between people who think that socialism is the way forward and people who don't is that socialists, communists have the strength of imagination, the bravery. I don't know. I feel like I'm tooting my own horn to imagine a society that's radically different from the one today, and it can be a very scary thing, especially if you're in a place of privilege, like so many of us are in this country. It when you're near the top of the food chain, which we certainly are here, any change can feel scary because mostly there's a lot more room below you than above you, and you've been witness to such barbarities and heinous acts by your own government and their allies, and it's only and you've seen them turned back on your fellow countrymen, and you can only imagine them being turned back on you. And it's a lot easier just to imagine things keep going as they are. At least what's coming that way. There was one other thing. Actually, do you want to say anything else on that,
No, go
Kyle?
ahead.
There was one other thing before we move on to. This has all been under our just defining communism, which I think was a great way of doing this, Kyle. Actually, but I just wanted to say one other aspect of sort of defining communism. We've sort of wrestled with and acknowledged the ambiguities in the difference between communism and socialism, and then there's also this other kind of ambiguity, which again I'll say is unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because it's complex, baked into these concepts. It's not that, dear listener, it's not that you're being confused, it's that it's confusing. There's another one of these ambiguities, which is that these real revolutions, which have happened around the world, we talk notably about the USSR and China, but of course there's Cuba, there's Burkina Faso, there's Venezuela, there's on and on and on. Laos, anyway, keep going. Vietnam. Anyway, stop. Um, these are real revolutionary movements that, to a certain extent, each one call themselves a communist or a socialist revolutionary movement, and they all looked very different. They all took account of the material conditions in the country at the time before the revolution, and they didn't stick to any kind of orthodoxy when it came to reading Marx or reading Lenin. And Marx, actually, this may be an Engels quote, but anyway, at the time of, actually, I think this is an Engels quote. Engels and Marx, but this is an Engels quote, acknowledged this fact that as well as being a sort of economic system, as well as being sort of a pathway through history, through future history, communism is also, quote, the real movement which abolishes the present state of things. The conditions of this movement result from the now existing premise. So
True.
communism is also, what'd you say?
I said true.
True. So communism is also a battle standard. It is a shining star toward which liberation movements, specifically colonial movements, people in countries that are exploited, hyper exploited by the by the Western powers. It is the real. It is the goal to which these revolutionary movements are striving, and it is the fuel, the ideological fuel with which they grow their numbers and talk about and conceptualize a future society for themselves. So it's also this very real thing and this very unideological thing in a certain sense. It's a very psychological thing, sort of. You know, it's the real movement that abolishes the present state of things. So that was the last one from Principles of Communism, right, Kyle?
Yep, that'll be the last
Okay,
one.
great. So we're gonna move on to a totally different definition now. We've got a few more to get through. That was great. I'm so glad we spent so much time on communism, though. So we're going to talk about a word that comes up first in Marx, and that word is alienation. And the way Marx uses the word alienation, so, you know, alienation is a word that in general sort of means, you know, to be separated from, to be, usually it has sort of a negative connotation, you know, yeah, to be separated from a thing. The way Marx uses it is a concept that is about the character of modern, and I say modern meaning middle of the 19th century, because that's when Marx was writing, capitalist production. Think of Henry Ford and what's his name, Taylor, from later on, whatever, the founder of Taylorism, this, you know, managerial style that became very popular, sort of, you know, takes a lot of what Henry Ford's, you know, industrializing of the, what do you call it, the assembly line. I mean, assembly lines are as old as people are, I would say. You know, the idea that you can work more efficiently with a group if each person does one task over and over again instead of trying to do the whole thing. That's a very old concept. But in terms of them becoming the foundation and, you know, hallmark really of a modern industrial economy, was new to capitalism. The efficiencies, and I guess this is a little bit off the top of my head, but maybe Kyle, you can push back if this is wrong. But the efficiencies that capitalism both required to sort of fuel its never-ending need for economic growth, as well as what it required, as well as sort of what it engendered in terms of just the organizing of a factory. You got these long assembly lines where instead of, you know, you're a shoemaker and you know, order the rubber, and then you have this bit of rubber, and you know, cut off a sole shape, and then you get the leather, and you cut out the leather shape, and you mark it, and you get the laces, and you sew it together, and you tie it up, and you put it out on for sale. Instead of being involved in each step of that process, you're just, you know, tracing out a sole shape all day, 12 hours a day. And that's all you do. You're part of this machine. You're a cog in the machine that produces a lot more shoes a lot more efficiently than any one person could. But what occurs on a sort of psychological basis, and Marx identified this, is you become alienated from your work. And this causes I don't know what you want to call it, an angst in the worker. An angst which importantly is one of the kind of miseries that seems to be somewhat inherent in capitalism, and which necessitates the liberation of the workers from the oppressive systems that force them into these jobs. You know, it's cut out 1,000 shoe soles a day or starve. That's the model under capitalism, and being alienated from your labor, from the fruits of your labor, from the process of creating a shoe, for example, is one of the unavoidable aspects of capitalism.
Yeah, yeah, that was good. I just want to emphasize, or rather, I guess, give another way of trying to understand this from the audience member, just to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind. Um, the textbook definition is that it's a four-stage process. It begins with the alienation from your own product. It then leads into an alienation from the process, and then that leads into an alienation of other people, and then you finally land yourself into a alienation from yourself as a worker. And I think that you did a good job of explaining that. But I did just want to make sure that like people understood. Effectively what the entire like, umbrella was really leaning into. It's a difficult term, no doubt. Um, but effectively, yeah, just like Ruben said, workers don't own or control what they create. Workers often have no say in how the work is done. Capitalism pits people against each other in a competitive market, and then work just becomes a way to survive, and that's kind of like the final phase of alienation. I think that our fellow American workers can highly relate to that scenario. I know that I can. All right, so that brings us to our next term, and this one's going to be a big one as well. This one is perhaps, I guess I would describe it as like the foundational, the most important philosophical understanding of Marxism. It's called dialectical materialism. And I know it sounds like a lot, and it kind of is, but I'll do my best to try and explain it as
It
plainly as
definitely
I
is.
possibly can. Yeah. So, so dialectical materialism, yeah. No, you're absolutely correct,
The
though.
understanding that you need in order to follow a basic conversation about socialism is not too much. Like it goes deep and it goes wide and it goes confusing. But we don't need to go those places for the purposes of today. Thank
Yeah,
God.
we're gonna try and keep it a little simple. So, so in order to understand anything, there's an antithesis and a thesis.
Oh
I'm
God.
just kidding. Yeah, I hope you're taking notes. This will be on the test.
I totally thought you were serious. I was like, oh no, he started off all wrong. Oh, that's so funny. You really got me. You totally got me.
Yeah. So, so dialectical materialism is Hegelian dialectics mixed with Marxist materialism. So dialectics simply means that two things can be true about anything at the same time, and Hegel says, do not be surprised when those two things contradict. Materialism is an ideology that conflicts with idealism. That means that it's from the material world. See,
Or
even when I dumb it down,
it opposes idealism. It's the opposite of idealism. As
yeah,
opposed, I just wanted to clarify because you said conflicts twice. And anyway, yeah, it
you're
materialism and idealism are opposites.
yeah, that's correct. So, so idealism says that it's mind over matter thought, right? Like your mind can be set over your material reality. Materialism simply says no, matter over mind, and that's basically the roots of the scientific aspect of Marxism, and why Marxism is a science, is that we are dealing with the material realm. We understand that we have no control over the material realm. I can't change any object on my desk from what it is. A lot of other philosophies in philosophy are of the idealism branch, which is really unfortunate because idealism is not very grounded in reality. Um, I don't want to point any fingers at this time, but like pretty much if you've heard of a philosophy, it's probably almost certainly rooted in idealism. Um, all the big names are. it's unfortunate. You know, and
Yeah, there's a I studied philosophy in college, and
mm,
it's been a an interest of mine forever. Um, and there's a real uh, serious discussion to be had that is being had and has for many decades. Like what is the use of philosophy anymore now that science has become the scientific method has become it's so clear how well it works and how what an effective tool it is in investigating the world. I mean, it's not just a quirk of language that proto science back in Aristotle's day was called what natural philosophy. It's because back then material observations about the world, let's say, or yeah, material observations about the world were were a type of philosophy because philosophy was sort of the study of stuff, general, sort of an umbrella term, and we hadn't yet carved out science. And then we did carve out science, and what was left was, yeah, a lot of idealist, a lot of stuff about language, and a lot of stuff about the mind.
yep. Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. You know, I do believe, without sounding like too much like a tin hat conspiracy theorist, that the powers around us really want us focusing on idealism because they're terrified of if we start realizing that like materialism is how to actually affect the world.
Yeah, and the way that dialectical materialism, the way the rubber hits the road in terms of how it actually expresses itself in the context of building a socialist society, um, has to do with the kind of experimental and data driven way of designing a new initiative, policy directive for the way government funds should be spent, or which, yeah, I mean, that's a fine example because basically the way a government really acts is through, spent deciding where to spend money and how. So it, rather than the kind of stuff you see coming through the American Congress right now, like there's only two genders and we declare it so. That is a prime example of an idealist uh, worldview, philosophy. We have decided because we have introspected, I guess. I don't know. We've consulted with our local fascist and declare now that there are two genders. That and we're not going to cite any study. We're not going to take into account anything material, anything that derives from the material world. Um, that's an idealist policy. Socialist governments, if they're practicing dialectical materialism, do not do such things. If you look at if you look at the rhetoric that socialist leaders use, like I'm thinking of Maduro right now, he's always talking about we're going to start 3 studies, you know, and these will be the most important studies. He's getting all fired up about these studies that he's funding. And then once we know what the outcome of the studies are, we're gonna really implement these changes. You know what I mean? And like this is dialectical materialism because you come up with an answer, you try to implement the answer, you recognize the contradictions in that answer, which practically speaking, are the ways it failed, the ways it didn't live up to what you thought it was going to. So you study those failures and you correct them. This is this sort of pendulum like swing of a dialogue between success and failure and study, and it's all based around science, meaning it's all based around observations about the real world and obviously conversations with people because it's all about implementing the will of the people. But yeah, I'll just stop there. I don't know how to wrap that up.
It's a hard concept to talk about because it's so deep. It's the kind of thing that you like. Yeah, okay, like most Marxists have some like understanding of it, but like to actually like infuse dialectical materialism into your worldview is it could be a years and years long process, really kind of at minimum. It's not easy to get into. It takes a ton of reading, but ultimately it's worth it, because I know that I've already said this somewhere on this podcast before, but I do truly believe that someday the scientists of this world are going to wake up and realize that they've been doing dialectical materialism the whole time.
Hmm.
Because dialectical materialism is science. That's what it is.
Right,
It's
right,
objective
right,
truth.
right.
It's
That's
a
true.
scientific tool to identify objectivity.
Yeah. I mean, and I mean, on the flip side of that, I totally agree with what you just said, that the importance of it, and how difficult it is to get what feels like a good understanding of it, because it is very complex. But also just to say, I just heard recently, actually, this just came back into my mind while you were talking. I don't know if it was somebody did a study, maybe in sort of an informal study of a lot of Marxist and socialist literature. Um, am I butchering this? It might have even been very informal. Anyway, it seemed to me from what they were arguing with examples that people who use socialists in sort of academic debate type environments use the word dialectical material, use the phrase dialectical materialism in many different ways that are not, what am I trying to say? Your ability to really get confident about dialectical materialism and what it is and what it isn't is not the most important thing in the world. I think it's important that you sort of understand the basic gist of it, which I think we've covered here, and just don't stress. Just allow yourself to move forward with this basic understanding. It will be added to as you consume more scholarship on this stuff and talk with other people who are into this stuff. But just to say that a lot of people who know what they're talking about, who are successful theoreticians, leaders, even in the socialist outlook, really don't use this word in a very rigorous way. So don't worry about it.
Right.
Let's move on. I think
Yeah, let's move on.
unless you okay, great. Um, so next is historical materialism. Historical materialism is a much simpler concept than dialectical materialism. Thank God. The again coined by Marx. I guess this whole episode really is. Historical materialism boils down, if I'm going to be reductive, it boils down to Marx's famous assertion that all history is the history of class struggle. And what does that mean? That means that one can accurately make sense of history, and I'm talking all of history, from Sumeria on. So much has happened since then. And it is it is infinitely complicated what has happened. History is a story that one tells about what happened that helps to make sense of it, and rather than making it more confusing or rather than making it more confusing. And it helps you to make predictions about the future. I mean, what's the point of studying history? In the end, it's so that you can understand the present and the future, and make sort of risk analyses, if we're going to be really crude about it, about the future. What decisions do we make as people, as a society? What can we learn from history and what's happened before? So Marx, historical materialism, is the idea that if you boil down, if you reduce the major major twists and turns of history to antagonisms between different classes, that is, between feudal lords and serfs, that is between masters and slaves, that is between kings and subjects, that is between capitalists and the working class. Um, those antagonisms, those sort of fundamental orientation based conflicts that, if one capitalist doesn't hate one worker, that's not what we're saying. It's that the ruling class as a whole, the capitalist class as a whole, their interests are opposed, are incompatible with the working class, the working class's interests in some fundamental ways. Those contradictions, those conflicts, history can be understood as how they unfold, how those conflicts unfold.
Right. So there are two key elements to historical materialism, and that is simply something that I've already alluded to earlier when I was talking about how each economic system is a stepping stone for humanity. Economy shapes society. Economy shapes every single aspect of your life. From the grocery store to your work-life balance to your income to your boss's, extracted value from you, effectively. And then the second thing is the class struggle divides change. So history moves forward because conflicts between groups with different interests, like workers fighting for better conditions against capitalists. So I think that you said that very effectively. That was very good. I think
All right,
that
and oh, go on.
I think we're almost an hour into this into this recording at the moment. So and we still have not mentioned our ad. So I think it's time for the ad read.
Thank you for that. Well, yeah, we got to mention this because they are paying us the big bucks.
Big
Today's
bucks.
episode of the social Today's episode of the Socialist Podcast is brought to you by Simply Safe Home Security. The United States is safer than it's ever been in its history, but the continued societal control that the ruling class exerts requires you to be scared of your neighbor. So keep that creepy neighbor off your lawn. Keep the communists out of your doomsday shelter. Make sure all the people on your block are the right color with Simply Safe Home Security. There's no safe like Simply Safe.
Wow. Thank you, Simply Safe.
What's
All
next?
right. So we have a couple more terms. Um, I guess. All right. So the next one is surplus value, and so this is gonna be a little bit of a pivot. Previously, we've been talking strictly about philosophy. Now we're moving into economics here, just for a little bit. I promise it's not as boring as it sounds, um, because as a worker, you definitely need to know this word. Surplus value is effectively the value that's extracted from your labor. So I've not found a better way to explain this to people who don't know than how Richard Wolff describes it. So I'm going to rip him off, rip off his homework a little bit on this one. Um, if you have a hot dog stand, right, and your boss pays for the hot dog stand, and he hires. So I guess you don't have a hot dog stand. Imagine your boss has a hot dog stand and your job is to make hot dogs. So your boss is selling each hot dog for $3, and he's paying you $10 an hour. Well, after the fourth hot dog, now your boss is making surplus value, and if you sell 200 hot dogs in an hour, which would be very impressive, frankly. That would be a lot of surplus value. I don't have a calculator in front of me. I can't tell you exactly. But effectively, everything after that $10 value begins surplus value. Now, there is something to be said. You could feasibly put the materials for the hot dogs into the account. You could put the real estate that it requires and the advertising that it requires for this hot dog stand. Um, and that would all be fair, right? Because that would be quote unquote, as the capitalists would like us to believe, the say it with me, class, the risk the capitalist takes.
I was nervous. I knew you were going to say it, but I was like, no, let me not like say the wrong thing. But I should have just gone for it. That would have been so great.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. So, so yeah, it's actually a pretty simple term. It's nothing crazy. This is like what we get back, what we put in versus what we get back. That difference. And we do have to consider things like advertising. We do have to consider real estate, stuff like that. But yeah, that is surplus value.
Yeah, just to like piggyback on that and just go on with what you were saying. Like there is no justification, from a socialist perspective. There is no justification for the unlimited potential return on investment for securing the cart and buying the hot dogs and getting the land. You know what I mean? That's the fundamental unit of the capitalist economy, is that you do these things, you secure these initial and continuing materials that are needed, aspects that are need tending to, and then you get to profit potentially forever to infinity. Um, and you're owed that because what the propaganda tells you, as Kyle was saying, is you risked a lot to buy this stuff, and if the hot dog cart business doesn't go well, you're gonna be, I don't know, homeless, I guess, is like the what these people imagine the average capitalist business owner is facing, that kind of precarity, that kind of precariousness in their life. We don't need to go into why right now why those things are totally false. But it's just important now, especially since we're coming up on the hour mark, that we understand that surplus value is just the value it's profit. It's basically another word for profit, right?
Right. Real quick, I do
Right.
want to just say the biggest difference between when it comes to risks is the bourgeoisie risk becoming a proletariat, the proletariat risk going homeless. So who's really at risk here?
Exactly.
Like their biggest fear,
Exactly.
their worst nightmare is becoming what you are
Right.
every single day.
Right. Exactly. And there's so many protections because the bourgeoisie, because the ruling class writes the laws. There's so many protections that even that. I mean, your average business owner whose business fails doesn't become a worker. They start a new business. Where how? Well, there's a lot of ways.
They
There's a
file
lot of
for
ways. It has to do
bankruptcy.
with
They
laws.
yeah,
Right. It has to do with bankruptcy laws. It has to do with generational wealth, the laws that protect rich people to give their kids money.
equity in
It has to
general.
do,
Yeah,
yeah, it has to do with the credit system and the way that works. I mean, it's all built by them for them,
and
and
it
to
goes
to
on
mitigate
and on
as
and
much of
on.
that risk as they possibly can, and then to fall back and say, "Oh, but it's so risky." It's just, well, it's mealy mouthed bullshit, is what it is, of course.
Yeah, it's
Okay, so we're
laughable.
going to move on to our last point here, our last term in need of definition, which is the Marxist labor theory of value. Um, Again, this is a deep, and to be honest with you, I do not really understand the details of it, but I do understand enough of it to be able to tell you that the labor theory of value is a I don't know if Marx really came up with it, the first person in the world, but he certainly is credited with developing it to a point where it had never been developed before. It is a theory of how things get their value, how this bolt of linen, as Marx used in a lot of examples, how it gets to be $8, let's say, how it gets to be worth something. And it's opposed to classical economics, what socialists and communists call bourgeois economics, which I guess, what do they call theirs? The price theory of value? Exchange theory of value. Exchange theory of value. So, the kind of classical bourgeois economic conception of the value of this linen is it's whatever somebody is willing and able to pay for it in a marketplace, in a sort of theoretical marketplace where there's infinite competition, and we can sort of come to, it's the money that went into it, that's its base cost, and then the profits that have to be taken through each step of the process, in order to get it actually made from cotton into a bolt of linen, and then whatever somebody will pay for it. So the $8 is basically what it ends up being. I mean, we live under capitalism, so your sort of more or less instinctive understanding of value in society is more or less bourgeois or classical economic value. Marx's labor theory of value opposes that, says that labor is the thing, not exchange value, not how much it ends up costing in a store. The labor that is put into a thing is responsible for its value. So, I think Kyle may be better to take it from here, but I'll just say that fundamentally what the labor theory of value says is that just because the linen is $8 doesn't mean that's its value. In fact, it could be much less than that. And this becomes much clearer when we talk about, let's talk about the value of a Bitcoin or the value of an NFT or the value of a share of stock in Boeing, or the value of a unit of electricity coming to your home. I mean, these things are. It becomes clear that two differing conceptions of what makes a thing valuable could really disagree about the value of this thing. And the reason why, it's $10 per kilowatt hour right now, your electricity, is because the capitalists have decided that that's the value of it. So Marx would disagree. Please save me, Kyle. Please take it from
Yeah,
here.
yeah, I'm taking it. I think that, in my opinion, the easiest way to really kind of highlight the labor theory of value is in the housing market. I mean, I think that everybody can agree that the housing market is totally out of whack. We've had houses that used to sell for as little as like $30,000 going for, $300,000 today. But crypto is certainly a good example as well. So I have the definition in front of me, and the definition says that the labor theory of value posits that the value of a commodity is determined by the socially necessary labor time to produce it. In other words, the value of a good or or a good or service is based on the amount of labor, quote unquote, measured in time, that goes into producing it under average conditions of production and with average skill and intensity. Ooh, a lot of big words. Um,
That makes sense to me, though.
Okay, good. I think that with your precursor, it makes a lot more sense, and I hope that it does
Yeah,
for our audience. I don't
yeah.
have a whole lot to add to it. I think
It's
that you got it.
kind of, I think what that added is like what value is not is speculation. Like that's, I think,
Yeah,
the big like counterexample. Like something does not become more valuable because a bunch of people made a stock market where they basically bet against each other and speculate about what it's going to be worth tomorrow. Some value is, under Marx's labor theory of value. Value is much more tied to the material world. It's much more determinable, in a sort of an objective. I don't like using that word, but in a more objective way. It's not about the psychology of hypothetical people and their predictions about the future. It's about what happened to the thing to get it to my house,
right.
to get it into a usable state.
Yeah, I agree. And I just recently found out that Tesla, I believe, this is off memory, is 23 times overvalued compared to the next leading car manufacturer in the world, which is just absurd. I saw that if you put like the top 10 car manufacturers in America up against the Tesla stock, like they can't even match it. So
Oh
a perfect
God.
example of just absolutely being bloated because it's
Oh,
not like
another
there's
great
Teslas
example.
everywhere.
Another great example from today, I think, or yesterday. This is January 26, 2025. We're recording this. China just revealed this new AI. I can't remember the name of it. I just like saw the
Deep
news.
search,
This new AI system, and they spent like
deep seek.
what did they spend? They spent like $20 million developing it or something.
I read 6 million.
$6 million, and
Yeah,
then OpenAI, who like won't share how they do anything, is worth I don't know, fucking 22 billion. I don't know. I mean, I'm pulling these numbers out of my ass, but it really goes to show you that I mean, we all know anybody who works in any sort of a like a white collar job, we all know that 90% of the time, 90% of the people are just fucking off at work, collecting a
yep,
paycheck, not doing shit. And that so like people doing bullshit jobs and needing to justify their jobs in
yep,
conjunction with rampant speculation about these big companies creates this like perpetual bubble for capitalist goods and services and companies.
yeah, yeah. That actually reminds me of a quote I saw just the other day. It was on an article about how China has a 90% home ownership rate. And underneath at
Right.
the very bottom, it had President Xi directly quoted saying, "Houses are for living in, not for speculation."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should wrap it up. It's been more than an hour now, or maybe by the time it's edited, it'll be closer to an hour. But that was fantastic. That was fun. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, I had a great time.
Um, we will be back next time. Maybe we'll do like an interview episode on a topic or something. I don't know. I don't think we have a plan yet for next time, but come back and listen again, please, you people.
Yes. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.